Hey everyone, how we doing out there today? This is the Flip Flop Investor Show, and I am your host, Todd Bayer, the Flip Flop Investor himself. Every week we get together, we talk about real estate investing here in the Inland Empire, and what I like to do is bring on a special guest that knows a lot about real estate. Usually it's an expert of some kind. Today we're not going to have an expert, we're just going to have some guy. His name's Stephen McKee. How you doing today, Steve?
I don't get the expert. I don't get the expert moniker anymore.
Oh man, I wish I could, but budgets are getting tight these days. Yeah, budgets are getting tight. We can't bring on real experts anymore.
Sorry, I came here to put together equipment as the table falls apart as we start the show.
Yeah, we accidentally pulled out the I don't know, whatever that lead line is or something. I don't know. I'm not an audio engineer. Maybe you could fill me in over there, Nick. But I don't know.
We got it, Nick. We're good.
I think we're good. But no, Stephen is actually he's an expert. He's the one that he was my first real estate mentor. Really, because he was doing flips before I was.
Really, I was the. It's the blind leading the blind in that case.
Yeah, and you know what? But in this business, you need somebody that's got a little more experience than you to help you through that first hump, which is just do something in this business, right? I mean,
that's what when we've talked to people now about they want to mentor. A lot of people get some experience. They want to mentor somebody.
Yeah.
You really have to be in it for a year to have a ridiculous amount of knowledge compared to the person that's brand new.
Absolutely. I mean, even doing one deal is going to be enough information in your own mind because you've already gotten through all those other hurdles, and it's probably fresh enough in your mind that you remember the struggle you were going through.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking earlier today, when I think the first time we ever went out and wrote a bunch of offers, we wrote 20 offers in one day.
Yeah.
And I remember being terrified, not that we're not going to get any of them.
What if they accept them all?
What if I get all of them accepted? What am I going to do with 20 deals? I only have enough money to buy one, what's going to happen? So, stupid little fears like that.
Well, it's funny that, we just saw it again today. And, one of our members of the club today was on the phone with our admin and asking, a series of they were just fear-based questions. Right?
Yeah.
She was like, how do I do this? How do I do this? And all the directions are there. And then she just said, well, I'm scared and I haven't done this before and I don't want to screw it up. And I was like, perfect.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it really is you just don't want to screw it up. And that makes complete sense.
Yeah. And, I can completely and fully appreciate, where she was coming from when she said that. But it's, it's kind of funny just to hear it because I'm not used to it anymore. And you know what I forgot to mention, aside from just being my original real estate mentor, aside from my mom, who taught me how to evaluate and, really basic real estate terminology. But Steve also is the second half of the now famous and officially launched Flip Flop Investors.
Yeah. Oh, on
Patreon.
I never considered, because this thing started the Flip Flop Investor.
Yeah, this used to be the Flip Flop Investors show.
Plural.
And then at some point Steve was like, I just don't have a whole lot of time to do this every week. So
actually, what it was like is I keep getting fatter, and this is cutting into part of my workout routine. And I need some more time in my schedule to be less fat. So I'm going to stop doing the radio show that just has me sitting in a chair for a couple hours.
Here's a thought. Put down the fork.
No, but, I mean, in all seriousness, it became really time-consuming to run across town. And I was trying to... We had a ton of deal intake at that time.
We did.
We were buying a lot of property. And so for those of you guys who don't know the way we operate... I'm the front end. When a deal comes in, I'm the one who evaluates it and talks to the person bringing the deal in for us.
Yeah.
And so, the back end of Todd's job is really predictable until we're like, we need money and we don't have somebody committed, and then his job becomes chaos. So mine becomes chaos on the front end when a whole bunch of people show up there, and Todd's job becomes chaos when we don't have somebody who immediately steps up and funds one of our transactions.
Yeah, and that's always fun.
Yeah, and so for me, on the front end, it's sort of time is of the essence, and on the back end, it's we could take a day or two more. The demand got to the point where I was like, you can do the radio show. I don't like it as much as you do.
Yeah, I think it's fun. I'm having a good time. I hope everybody else out there is having a good time.
That's because Todd does random voices by himself at home. He does. Todd has radio practice sitting in his living room.
I got that real radio voice.
Yeah, I don't have that. I got I got the I talk too fast and mumble voice.
Yeah, that's true. A lot of people have to make you repeat stuff. I always think it's funny.
I think it's hilarious.
Because I know everything you say. I've known you for 26 years.
So a lot of people have known me for so long. So, obviously my daughter and girlfriend and family, they hear me, but I'm mumbling really fast to people who don't know. They're like, what? Huh?
Yeah.
So if you're listening for the first time and you don't understand me, listen to like 42 more shows I'm on, and eventually you'll figure it out.
Yeah, maybe. Hopefully I'm here to, do some translating. I can say what Steve meant to say, what he really said there was. Yeah. I just noticed we got all these clocks behind us now. And, for those of you watching at home, which I'm sure there's a ton of you, we have a new studio here in Redlands, from KCAA. A lot of you have probably heard about it. Multiple broadcasters, I'm sure, have talked about it at this point. But it's actually really nice. I think they did a great job here. It completely surprised me 2 weeks ago when I walked in. I'm like, oh, it's done. Look at this place. They did a great job. So if you're watching live on YouTube right now, you're seeing the new setup. It's very cool.
It's interesting to see the way you build like depth of field on a you view depth of field on a camera, and like you look at the set and like there's like 2 feet behind this wall. If you're watching them, there's like this wall, and then there's this like back wall behind it. It's a giant gap.
Yeah,
and it's weird. But I'm looking at this video monitor and I can't tell the difference. I don't think people actually care about this though.
Yeah,
you should probably talk about real estate.
Probably not. Well, it has something to do with it because when you talk about staging in a home, or when you talk about
nice segue. I was waiting for the segue.
Yeah,
we actually have that in one of our homes right now. If you notice in Via Pino, our biggest project, right, there's a whole series of structures we took out, like through the kitchen, the dining room, the front living room, and then through the outside. And we've sort of like the dining room has this craftsman dividing wall, right, and then the kitchen has this long island, and so it gives us this really long effect the way it's broken up. And I think front to back, the house is only like 80 to 100 feet, but it looks really long because of, like, the way there's these barriers that create this like depth for the viewer.
Right. Yeah, and people want that open concept, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
We had to open this place up, and it looks great. Finally finishing that thing up here pretty soon. That's going to be awesome. Yeah, if you ever get involved in a really big house, like a 7,000 square foot kind of house,
they take longer.
They take a lot longer, and they're a lot more expensive.
You know what? That one, surprisingly, we're a little over budget on it, but surprisingly for the area and like the quality of that home, we didn't do too bad.
True.
Just the time. The framer. The home was built in 2 phases. In the initial phase, it was built in was an owner builder, and the second phase was a contractor. The second phase, amazing. The first phase, oh man! Well, I think our framer spent over a month walking around the house just fixing all the problems somebody left behind.
Yeah,
and the house looked totally like. So for anybody who walks in a home and thinks, oh, this whole place looks fine, and we want to open up this front entry area because it had a low ceiling. And then we start to take some of this stuff out.
The foyer.
The foyer. We have a really nice foyer now with a chandelier.
Yeah, I used to have a really low, like a 7-foot ceiling. Like right when you walk on the front door, here you come into this big house, and there's this 7-foot ceiling, right in the foyer right there. And it's, it was kind of an unspectacular entrance to this big, magnificent home, So we're like, we got to take this ceiling up. We removed that.
Well, and it seemed easy if it was framed properly.
Yeah, but it wasn't. Yeah, which we found out. And so our framer had to reframe a good portion of the original structure of the home.
Yeah.
The first phase.
Exactly. And the back phase, he did almost nothing. We just moved a couple walls. As a matter of fact, we didn't move anything.
Yeah, I think there was one issue we did in the back because there was something with like on the exterior wall above the back door or something like that. But it wasn't even that big of a deal. It took them like half an hour to fix.
Yeah, in comparison, the whole front of the home was basically reframed. Yeah, like we have this, in this home, we have this really nice open formal or master bath. And the master bath is huge. It's like, I don't know what it is in feet because I always do floor plans in inches, but it's like 220 by 220 inches. It's a big master bath. And then in is this tub, this freestanding tub. Well, underneath this freestanding tub is basically the weakest point in the whole house. So we go to tear the ceiling off and look at this framing, and it's like 2 floors stacked on top of each other done poorly.
Yeah.
And so the entire floor had to get reframed there.
Yep.
There's just a bunch of failures as an owner builder that I think haunted the sellers.
Yeah.
As they left the house.
Yeah, and because the former owner came back one day when we were there.
Apparently, she came a lot.
Yeah, apparently, but she just happened to be there that one day that we were there, and she was telling us how the original contractor was just a nightmare to work with, and all that kind of stuff. Which, I mean, that happens. Like we've hired and fired more contractors than most people will probably meet in their lifetime. It's just unfortunately, I don't know what it is. What's with the guys? What's with the contractors out there that you just can't show up to a job on time, and
I don't know, man.
You can't stay in budget and can't plan for all the things that could go wrong.
Because
they do.
It's one of the biggest. It's one of the biggest problems in this industry.
Yeah,
is the reliability of the team.
Yeah, and I remember Adam Carolla had that show, To Catch a Contractor.
Yes.
Like it's obviously a problem.
It existed for a reason.
Yeah, exactly.
What's that? Homes on Homes.
I haven't seen that one.
Homes on Homes is a show that's on HGTV where he does the same thing.
It's Adam Carolla?
No, it's
different
something
guy.
Holmes. I forget his first name. Huh. It's Homes on Homes.
Okay, got it.
And he goes out and he does these. He looks at people's issues, like, I have a condensation issue I can't find, and he shows where the contractor failed when they did the repair.
Okay.
And then he redoes it, so they can't afford to redo it because they already spent on their money. So the show pays to redo this problem.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it's kind of a neat idea.
Yeah, that's like a current show.
I don't know. I know there's a lot of episodes that are backlogged if it isn't current.
Yeah, so maybe you can catch it on Hulu or something.
Dude, I think it is on Hulu. There are so many flip shows and stuff right now.
Yeah.
That I couldn't tell you what they are.
One thing we were talking about doing with these flip shows.
Yes, we should.
We were talking about watching these flip shows, and I don't know. I'd love to hear everybody's feedback out there on
Seriously.
this. Where we're gonna watch one of these flip shows and just talk crap on it, basically.
Yeah, we're it's live commentary, right? So the idea was I was listening to the Joe Rogan podcast, and he does a fight companion is what he calls it.
Okay.
So during the fight, they talk about what I think it's what to expect, and then they have commentary about all the fights, right? As a group, and he was talking about to somebody else, and I don't listen to the fight companions, and he described it, and I was like, I want to do that.
Yeah,
we could totally watch other people's abs. It's made up. Basically, they're made up cadence of their flip and numbers.
Yeah,
and then fill in the blanks between all of it.
Right. I mean, it could be fun. I'd love to hear what everybody would think about that.
Rehab was $42,000. Really, I'm looking at that tile alone, and that's $8,000. How'd you get in that number?
Yeah, exactly.
Stuff like that.
Yeah, and, they never really talk about their financing, and they never really talk about certain things. So they never mention closing costs, realtor fees. They don't, escrow, title, insurance. None of these things are factored into their numbers at the end. So
it'd be an interesting format. People would get some real clarity as to the difficulty of the job.
Yeah. Hopefully. I mean, it'd just be fun for us. We could just sit around and watch TV for an hour.
And why not? And then preferably drink while we're doing it.
Hey, that might not be a bad idea. Might just start drinking right now. What do we got?
The show right now. Well, hold on, Clay.
Yeah, hold on.
The show would get better if we did. We should do 4 episodes in a row. That way, by the 4th one, it's an amazing. It's an amazingly sloshed episode of.
That would be funny.
Commentary.
It's funny because I plan for hours and hours before we do this show every single time. So
it's a real
I just it's in my mind. I'm taking notes. I'm so prepared every single time I do.
These notes right here are really
yeah. Those notes I got. I have those right there. Where I prepare. Obviously, it was funny because I actually planned. I was thinking about this show, and I was thinking because I've been listening to Rich Dad Poor Dad, which I haven't done for a while.
I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna listen again. Since you're doing it now.
For those of you out there who haven't actually checked out this book, Robert Kiyosaki wrote a book called Rich Dad Poor Dad, and for not just myself and Steven, but a lot of other people we've known in this business, it was sort of the gateway drug that got us in, because many people out there have this mentality of a worker bee.
Yeah.
And, this was the book that for me, just sort of, my whole life, I'd always kind of have been an entrepreneur. I sold candy in elementary school, and in middle school I started a computer business, and I was doing these things throughout, my growing up. And the whole time when I'm in college, I'm I don't want to work for somebody else. I'm not going to get rich doing that, So are you
saying that's why you couldn't bring yourself to finish a college degree, because you couldn't see yourself being a sophisticated bean counter the rest of your life? Yeah,
pretty much. I'm a college dropout, and I'm not I'm not ashamed to say it, because when you go to college, you're going to learn to do some kind of vocation. Probably,
they wouldn't let me go back.
They wouldn't let you go back.
I got kicked out of RCC for failing out of classes. Then I got kicked out of Crafton for failing classes. Well, actually, I think I opted out of Crafton. Yeah, I failed like a class a semester, and then I opted out after my English teacher told me to quit.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had no place there either.
It's not exciting. I mean, it would have been more fun if you were like, I got kicked out for inciting a riot or something.
Oh, no. That would have been funny, though.
Yeah, no, like, I'm just, I hated going to class, so I didn't,
Yeah.
Yeah, well, hey, whatever. I mean, school sucks. I still think the same thing.
No,
I hate it.
And now it's expensive.
Yeah, now it's expensive. Like, for these kids that are going to college now and coming out with, $50,000, $80,000 student loans they have to pay off. Like, that's insane.
I'm not paying for it.
No. Yeah.
Not with my daughter. No way.
No way. Yeah. Sorry. But
I tell her all the time.
yeah.
I'm like, good luck. You better do really well in school if you care to go to college because you're getting a scholarship. Otherwise, you're going to work.
Yeah. So anyway, reading Rich Dad Poor Dad back then, I was 18, I think maybe almost 19 years old when I read Rich Dad Poor Dad for the first time. And it's just just lights were going off in my head the whole time. And now that I'm re-listening to it, a lot of those things that sort of resounded in my mind at that time are coming back to me. And it's weird because I've kind of forgotten my mentality that I used to have.
Don't buy a Porsche, let your property buy the Porsche.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of stuff.
Yeah, have your assets pay for your liabilities. You know, it's not about. And I one of the big things I remember he was saying, because the story goes that Robert Kiyosaki growing up had two dads. The way he looked at it, one of his dads was his real father's biological father. The other one was his best friend's dad, who his best friend's dad owned a bunch of businesses, a bunch of real estate, and things like that. And his poor dad was a teacher. I think he was a professor in a college or something like that.
I think both his mom and dad were, I believe.
Yeah. So he was, he had a ton of degrees. I think he had multiple PhDs or something like that. So he was a very smart, intelligent person, but he was just financially illiterate.
He had a lot of paper accolades.
Yeah, exactly. And every time he would ask his dad, hey, Dad, how can I be rich? His dad would say, you need to go get a good, high-paying job, focus on your education and all that. But when he would go ask his rich dad, his best friend Mike's dad, whenever he'd ask him, how can I be rich, he would say, buy assets.
Yeah.
Don't buy liabilities. Don't go out and buy the big house, the expensive car, all these things. Instead, put that money into something that's going to pay for those. And never say, I can't afford it. Say, how can I afford it?
Absolutely.
Reframing it.
I hate that phrase. Did they actually say that in the book?
Yeah.
That's weird because, it's always been in the back of my mind. I forgot that's in the book.
Yeah.
And I get angry at anyone who says I can't afford something. I get mad at them. And it's I think it's been ingrained in me for so long, it's visceral now.
Yeah. Then, and we meet tons of people that have an IRA or a 401k from a former employer or something like that. And they, they have this money, this retirement money that's sitting there. And, I was just talking to somebody the other day, this was a literal conversation. And we talked about, when the financial rep came into the store to show them all their options with their 401k, they set them down in front of this nice little paper with all these nice pie charts on it, and said, which pie do you think, because you're a middle-aged guy, you can afford to take a little more risk.
I like the orange pie.
Yeah, this one's got a little more of the orange in there,
It's Thanksgiving, it's pumpkinish. I'll take that one.
Yeah, it's the fall, and I mean, most people, they don't know what they're doing. They're just going to point at one of these, but the fact of the matter is, every single one of those is going to pay a horrible return.
Mine, after the fees on top of it.
Yeah, and then you have to pay fees on top of that. So, but people, they pay into their 401ks because a lot of companies have cut pensions. They're not really doing not a lot of companies offer pensions.
They're not
anymore.
reliable if they are.
Yeah, and so they, you have these 401ks, and then so people, they work for this company for 10, 15 years, and they've moved on. Now they're at this other company, and they had to roll this 401k into something, and somebody told them to roll it into an IRA. And it's really just the same kind of thing. You roll it into an IRA with, I don't want to name any specific companies, but you roll it to some big company, and same thing. You pick a pie, and your financial planner sits you down and says you should pick one of these, and they pay terrible returns.
You should pick one of these that pays me an amazing yield every year.
Yeah.
I get a couple percentage of your return.
Right.
And then if I get a whole bunch of people like you, eventually I don't have to work, and eventually you won't have to work either, but I don't have to work first.
Wouldn't it be great if your financial planner was actually partnered with you and cared so much about how much you made?
Oh, what a novel idea.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, that's the typical person. And but these people have this money sitting around, and they don't know how to put it to work into anything. And, they might catch one of these HGTV shows.
Yes.
And they're like, oh, I could do that.
We should go to that weekend workshop for free on Saturday.
And you know what? Honestly, you probably should go to it, but go to it armed with the mentality like, I'm not going to sign up for anything. I'm not going to pay for anything that they're selling at this thing.
From what I've seen, so Todd and I always have the caveat whenever we're talking about this. One of us will chime in and say, like, well, we're not saying it's useless education, because honestly, it isn't useless. Like, there's some useful education there. But, so you go to the free weekend course, right? Mm-hmm. And then let's say you sign up for the $2,000 or $5,000, whatever they're like,
the next level up.
The next tier. And sometimes it's $300 and then $3,000.
Usually usually it's like a half day is the first one. That's the free one. And then you get one of these weekend boot camps. You'll go to Vegas or something like that. And that's where they give you some good information, some good tools. Usually, I think
it's a good start.
It's probably a good start, and it's probably a good place to sort of hang there for a while. Mm-hmm. Don't decide to get into one of their mentorship programs until at least you come to the Inland Empire Real Estate Investment Club.
or a club in your area if you're listening somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly, which you most likely probably aren't, because
maybe they're on the internet.
They could be. There's a lot of people listening on the internet. I'm sure Nick could give us those numbers if we asked him.
He's like, not right now.
Wow, really that big of a number? No kidding. Oh, thank you, Nick.
I was like, oh my God, he looks so alarmed. Oh, it must be a huge number.
It's got to be a huge number.
But I mean, like the clubs are where they direct you at these seminars. They go to the clubs. Yeah. They tell you that.
Yeah, they tell you. They'll literally say, like, after you sign up for the mentorship program, now go and find your local real estate clubs to find...
to be your mentor.
Yeah, well, not just to be your mentor, but to find people to work with, right? To, like, assemble your team. Because that's, like, the first step. You got to get to know who you're going to work with.
Yeah, it's literally like a spreadsheet in my class that I taught. It's like, here's the list of people. Go find them and make friends with them and learn how they work.
Yeah. And so, go to something like that. But the club is really all you need after that point. If you want to go and sign up for one of their mentorship things, that's on you, because I don't think anybody we know is going to recommend doing one of those, because they're very expensive.
I don't think anybody has recommended it. They'll often say that they get some random person in a call center when they call in.
Yeah.
But which, by the way, for and I don't want to trash them too bad. For anybody wondering, these are all run by the same company. There's one company who runs the majority of these.
Yeah, they're all out of. It's a company in Utah.
Yeah, it's the same system. So like, no matter which one you go into, you're buying a different program, but the same parent company, same support.
Right. And by the way, the people that are supposed to be there, like the people from whatever show on HTV, they're not actually there.
They're not there. Oh, sorry, Stan couldn't be here today.
Yeah. Sorry, Christina and Tarek couldn't be here either.
Yeah.
They're not home.
Trust me, that'll happen. And then if you go to one, be like, man, those flip-flop guys were right.
Yeah, exactly. But I don't know where I was going with that. I think I was talking about Rich Dad Poor Dad.
I know I sidetracked it and I had a segue too. But yeah, so back. Anything with
I don't know. Back to Rich Dad Poor Dad. People, they have this money. That's where I was going with this.
Oh, okay.
People have money and they don't know what to do with it, so they find one of these things. They see the thing on TV and they think that's easy, but there's 3 prongs to every real estate deal.
Yes.
There's the deal. That's prong number 1. You need to have a deal. Prong number 2 is the management of that deal. Mm-hmm. That would be basically, all the construction, dealing with the realtor when you go to sell it. That's management. The third prong is the money. You need all 3 of those things to make a deal happen.
Yeah.
And
each one's worth 1/3 of the deal.
Exactly. Each one's worth 1/3. So let's assume you have a 3-person company. It's one person's job to find the deals. Mm-hmm. It's one person's job to manage the deals, and it's one person's job to fund the deals.
Wow, it's as if we were set up that way already.
Yeah, exactly. And it works. It's a good way to do it. But these people with, they have a little bit, a few bucks in their pocket or something. They have this retirement account. They see the show on TV, and all you really see on TV is the management side.
Yeah.
And you don't even really see that. You only see a very small fraction of the management.
Yeah. I'm going to kick over this cactus.
Yeah. Oh, man. Oh, he kicked over that cactus?
I love that cactus.
That cactus made the curb appeal, Yeah, it's drama, for TV. It's fun. I don't know how many times we've gone to properties that are just, at each other's throats because of the design changes we made. I think that's never happened.
I would say pretty much never.
Yeah, exactly. Probably wouldn't be the paint color I picked, but it works.
Yeah, it'll sell.
It'll sell. I mean, most people repaint the house anyway.
Yeah.
So, so these people, they see the management side. They think, I could do that. But, this is a business where there's a lot of terminology. There's a lot of things you got to get to know in the beginning. And it's hard to teach that without just time invested.
Absolutely.
So I think, what a lot of people don't realize is how valuable a mentor could be in the very beginning.
Yeah.
Just having somebody that can guide you through every single little bit of the process.
So we say this a lot. Mm-hmm. And the one thing I don't think we've given much advice on is how to be valuable to somebody to get their mentorship.
Yeah.
And we don't really talk about it that often either.
Sure.
But we do talk about people that we find that we don't want to help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's, it's a tough thing to tell somebody you need to bring value to the deal somehow.
Yeah.
Because if all you're doing for me, let's assume, somebody goes out and they find an ugly house.
Yeah.
Here's this ugly thing that's out in, San Bernardino.
That's in the MLS.
Yeah, it's a deal that's it's currently listed on the MLS.
I saw it already.
Yeah, I already saw it, number one, but let's assume I didn't see it. Or maybe you saw this ugly house driving around one day, and I see this home and I'm like, okay, I'm looking at this house. What do you want me to do with it? If you're just giving me an address, what's the next step? And so
I found a house.
Yeah, I found a house. Cool. That's awesome.
Me too.
Congratulations.
I'm gonna look outside and find a house. There's one. There's one.
Yeah, there's one. Hey, that one's pretty ugly. But what am I supposed to do now? It's that person's job to take it to the next level.
Yeah.
We get a lot of people that send stuff to us and are like, here's a house or here's an address.
Yeah.
And it's like, cool. What do you want me to do with it?
Yeah.
And what's your expectation from this?
Should I go just buy it, or
should I buy it and just give you all the profit? Is that what you're expecting from me? Because that's what it feels like a lot of times.
Yeah.
Hey, I found a house. Cool.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Okay. So you identified a property, which on the acquisition side of things would be what, maybe 5% of the acquisition side,
or less.
It's not hard to find a house. You can walk out of your front door and look either to your left, right, or straight ahead of you. Okay, and you're probably going to see one.
If I were to think about what we just said, what we just actually said was, you probably don't know what the norms are of a mentor, so you should ask what the norms are, to avoid. Right? If that was a piece of advice, I'd say find out what are the things that happen to that person all the time that drive them insane. Up front,
yeah,
and then find ways to avoid them. Ask that question.
Okay,
you know what
I mean, I know on some deals, we'll find a house, and some things that would be useful for a person like this is okay, cool, you found a house. I'll do the value. I'll value it. I'll see what we're going to sell it for. We're going to make an offer, but I need this. I need you to run down to building and safety and find out what kind of permits are on here to see if that addition in the back is permitted or not.
And take photos of the inside.
Yeah, go take photos because we need those. That plays into the funding side of things.
Have you talked to the agent or the seller about what their expectations are with time and money, and do you have some information that will make the deal easier to negotiate?
Yeah, are we getting the property vacant when we close escrow, or does the owner expect to live there for a little while, or the tenant expect to live there for a little while?
Is the tenant cooperating?
Yeah. Do I have to evict somebody? It happens. All those things we need to know, and that's all part of acquisitions. Mm-hmm. So just showing us an address is not providing much value. I can literally, and I did this the other day, working with a neighbor of mine. I was showing him how to source deals.
Yeah.
We went on Google Maps. I just drove around neighborhoods on Google Maps, which I found about the nicest neighborhood I've ever seen in Rialto. I figured I can just pop my guy down in Rialto and I'd find an ugly house right away, but
pretty much
I didn't. I found the nicest neighborhood in Rialto completely by random selection.
Nice.
I just threw the little yellow guy down on Google. I threw him down on a street. Lo and behold, every house has a green yard. Every house has no cars in the yard. There's no oil stains on the street.
Should have put him by the railroad tracks.
Yeah. Yeah, I was on the right side of the tracks apparently.
Yeah.
But so but you can do that. We basically just drove around this neighborhood for about 5 minutes on Google Maps until I found an ugly house. It had still the old asphalt driveway. Every other driveway in the neighborhood had a paved, concrete driveway. This was an asphalt driveway. Mm-hmm. It had a dead yard. There was 8 cars parked in the driveway. One of them was partially parked in the front yard. I mean, that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
So I looked it up and found out it's owned by a landlord who owns the property. They live in Baldwin Park.
Oh, they're absentee landlord.
It's an absentee landlord.
Even more amazing.
And they bought it at the bottom of the market, so they've got plenty of equity right now.
They're going to use the money for something. Yeah.
So it's possible to go to this person and say, hey, I saw this property and looked like it needs a lot of work. How are your tenants treating you? You could basically sell them on it and. Their number was publicly listed. So,
or do you want a partner? Or
partner.
I'd be happy to help you fix it up and resell it and take part of the profit.
Yeah, You know, so I mean, I was able to do my driving for dollars on Google, you know, sitting at home. I could have been in my PJs, but I had company. So,
by the way, if anybody wondering, there's a little number at the bottom right corner that tells you what date the photo was taken.
Yeah.
If you're worried about it being current. So
yeah, it'll tell you.
People are like, oh, the photos are old. Just look there, and if it says like, you know, March 2018, good chance the house still looks the same.
Yeah, it's unlikely, and you can always check public records to see if it's been sold or anything like that in the meantime.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we looked. It's not currently listed. Hasn't been listed since it was sold back in 2000. I think it was 2011.
Great time to buy.
Yeah, it was clearly at the bottom of the market when they bought this thing. You know, and of course I saw where it was purchased in 2007 before it was a foreclosure, and you know it was a crazy amount of money. I'm like, how did this thing sell for that much money in 2007? You know,
I know I sold a couple of them. Like it was nuts.
Yeah, but you know, some people use that as an indicator of what it's worth today.
Yeah, I mean, in reality, you know, we say we're like in the 2003, 2004 time period right now.
Yeah.
You know, we're pushing to that 2005 time period. Todd and I are starting to get a little. Not concerned about tomorrow, but concerned about 2 years from now.
2 years,
really
yeah.
A year and a half. Next summer is the. I think we're going to be in like full blown mayhem next summer.
Yeah,
just like people buying like crazy.
Yeah, I think there'll be a lot of inventory, a lot of people looking to sell, but you know, not as many buyers on the market. You know, but we'll see. I mean, that's what the charts are for.
No, absolutely.
We'll see how it goes.
That's what the new charts say.
Right.
We'll see what they say 6 months from now.
Yeah,
it could be advancing quicker.
Who knows? You know, like we always see like these different little things happen like right before the end of the year or like right at the beginning of the year. You kind of see a jump because you know people get together for the holidays and they decide we need to finally sell that house. You know, or whatever.
Grandma needs to move back home.
Yeah, grandma needs to move back home.
Grandma needs to move into the downstairs bedroom because she's not doing so well.
Yeah.
It's interesting you brought up the street photos. You know, James, he's Todd and I invested in
FindSellers.com.
FindSellers.com.
And James has been on the show.
Yeah, so James has been on the show.
For those of you that are huge fans of the show, you probably saw the interview with James
I'm sure
Craig.
you did.
I'm sure you saw it. You had to have.
I didn't see it, but I'm sure somebody did. But he's working on a photo deal finding app.
Yeah.
So where it scans streets to find properties that have variances in the condition.
That's going to be awesome.
And it's going to be part of Namo.
Is it Namo or going to be Find Sellers?
It's going to be part of Namo.
Oh, okay.
So to be part of, I don't know if he's going to name it something else or if it's still be part of the Namo application.
Yeah.
So Namo, for those of you who didn't hear the episode, Namo is the more intense version of Find Sellers. Find Sellers is a very like tutorial-based how to find sellers application that allows you to basically click a couple buttons and then order mailers at a tenth of the cost and find a seller. And you have a really good chance of this person actually being a seller, not just throwing a dart at the wall.
Yeah.
And it doesn't use public records. It uses an algorithm, and I'm not going to get into the boring part of it, but it's really really effective, about 7 times more effective than normal software. So on a deeper dive, they have this really complicated version of it that Todd and I both looked at it and said, look, the general public doesn't want this. This is for like the super expert, and they're going to be getting really creative with the photo technology, trying to determine if the condition of the house is poor and if that's a flag for sellers.
Yeah, and so I mean that's going to be some exciting stuff because I mean, it's everything's about identifying deals.
He said it was easy. He was like, "This is really easy to do."
Oh, I'm sure it is.
I have no idea, but I believe him.
Well, James and Matt are like super geniuses, like.
So sometimes like I'm talking to James and like whenever I'm talking to Matt, he just does whatever he has to do, right?
Right.
But whenever I'm talking to James, I'm just like, "That's a great idea." Like he'll say stuff, and I'm like, you should definitely do that.
Right.
And then I'm like, I'm glad we invested in this team.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, smart people. That's the key.
We still need to let the city of Riverside know that we actually were the first person to fund a startup out of their incubator.
Yeah, the Excite program they have going.
They don't know yet.
They don't. We got to put out a press release.
We should tell them.
We should. So yeah, looking at deals. I don't know. We were talking about people going to finance their own deals and put their retirements to work. Stuff like that. So back to retirements, it's like, I mean, I had all this planned out, like
your notes, like way ahead of time. We just got through all of your notes so quickly.
We did, yeah.
Now we have to like figure out what we're going to say next.
I'll have to refer back to my notes.
No, on the retirement side, so we were talking about my parents the other day.
Yeah, we were.
So my parents have a chunk of money. So both my parents had a county, they government and local government jobs, I guess, right? Both technically state level. So they have good retirements.
Yeah.
And they had well-paying jobs to begin with, and so they my parents lived very lean as a kid. Like, we did a lot of stuff, but my parents, I think, lived on a third of their income. Like, we cooked dinner at home every day. Like, but they saved a lot, and so they have a nest egg that they don't even use. It's another account that, like, it's doing nothing. It's in money market stuff. And I was having a conversation with my dad. We were hanging out in the pool the other day, and I was able to get about 4 beers with him, so he'd actually start talking to me about money, because my parents never talked about money growing up, which is, for a lot of people listening, that might be common. If you have kids and you don't talk about money in front of your kids, you should do that.
Yeah. Because you don't want them to be financially illiterate.
Yeah, kids have no idea.
Well, all they see is rich people on TV, like music videos, and they're out there buying these expensive cars and living this Supreme or whatever lifestyle, and so like
the Instagram life.
Yeah, like it's at one time, like, it was society's changed, obviously, but there was a time, and I think Adam Carolla even talked about it.
He has a whole bit about it,
where like there was like the rich man on the street. He was driving his Rolls Royce down the street, and a father would say to his son, "Look up to that man. That's a man you want."
Look at Mr. Jenkins. Mr. Jenkins is a business owner. He drives a Rolls Royce. Like, wave to Mr. Jenkins.
Yeah, exactly. And, you want to be him one day, but now they throw rocks at Mr. Jenkins' car because everybody's he's just the rich, and he's the problem with the wealth disparity in this country or something like that. But
it's not all the jobs he created or all the money he donated to the charities or gave back to the community.
Right. Half the people on that street actually live on Mr. Jenkins' businesses because he,
his taxes on his property pay for everybody else's street.
Right. But no, let's throw rocks at the guy because, he's a terrible, terrible person.
But my parents, like, they don't invest in really anything with the money. It sits.
Yeah.
It's money market account. And, some guy collects a fee based on their,
sure,
their terrible yield.
They got their financial planner, and he's got their plan for him, and he's just executing.
No, it's not even a plan. Like, they're just the company's getting a fee for the money sitting there every year.
Okay.
Like, it's just money market.
That's even more painful.
Uninvested. Oh, it really is. And so, like, obviously, Andy at the club always says diaper syndrome, right? If somebody changed your diaper, they're never going to take advice from you.
Yeah.
So I said that to my dad. And I'm looking at him like, why don't you just buy something? Like, anything. Like, anything is better than your money sitting in this account doing nothing.
Yeah.
And, like, just invest in a boring, simple asset.
Sure.
And I finally got him to make a commitment to something.
Yeah.
I was really happy. He goes, what I really just want is some land to go shoot on. And, in California, it's difficult to shoot. There's a lot of places that, if you just want to target practice, like, you can't do it.
Yeah.
And people are pretty bad about leaving messes on other people's properties.
Of course,
and so, and as a child, we used to go to places when we'd help with these cleanups on public land, my dad and my brother. And I was like, great. I know an area where you can buy like 50 acres where no one will be around to bother you.
Yeah.
For like $50,000 and put this money, and it won't gain really any value, but maybe 30 years from now they'll build a housing tract there and it might be worth something.
Yeah.
And he was like, I'd be up for that. And I was just like, oh, did I get you to commit to something? And I was trying to so I started to explain to him that he's beyond the age where he can withdraw money from his account.
Yeah.
Because it's all pre-tax dollars. And he said, well, aren't there penalties? I'm like, no, you're 67 years old.
You're past 59 and a half.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you're 67. Like, you're well past your withdrawal time period.
Yeah.
And he goes,
in fact, he's gonna be hitting a time here in a couple of years
72
where he has to start taking it out.
71 and a half, 72?
I think it's 72.
72.
I could be wrong, but
I'm 90% sure 72.
Check with your financial planners on when you can start taking money out of your.
All of this financial advice is entirely from books we've read. We're not certified financial planners anyway.
Yeah, we have no idea what we're talking about.
No,
we're just.
This is entertainment.
This is entertainment. I'm having a good time.
Yeah, but I started explaining to him, and then I realized, I'm like, oh. Like, no one explained to these people who picked a pie when they could use the pie.
Yeah.
Like, no one's told them, like, oh, like, at this date you can start doing this with it. Like, he has no idea that his minimal taxation, based on his current income for the retirement money he can draw and use.
Yeah.
No clue.
Yeah, and what he could use it for. I mean, so many people are, because we're not raised that way. It's, the traditional financial model in the United States is, teaching people to basically invest in mutual funds, and saying that those are a safe investment. But mutual funds in the downturn lost a lot of money, and like real estate lost a lot of money too, but at least you had something there,
It still got rent. You don't get rent on a mutual fund.
No, you don't. it would be nice if there was a way to do it, but yeah, I mean, most stock and mutual funds, it's just an intangible asset. It's something that doesn't really exist. It's the faith that Starbucks is going to have a great year this year, and you're going to make money because Starbucks is doing really well.
It's pumpkin spice season.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
coming.
They
got that bump.
They got that one special thing they're doing that they're going to sell out of in a half an hour.
Yeah, exactly, and it'll add a tiny fraction to the bottom line.
Right.
But that's the bummer about the intangible asset, right? I mean, it's entirely based on the faith of the people.
Sure, but if Starbucks puts out this thing and it becomes an amazing global success, there's that chance that you're going to hit the jackpot, and you bought in at Starbucks at $20 a share and it shoots up to $200 a share, and you just 10x'd your money. That's
awesome.
The excitement of that, but it's also the excitement of winning at blackjack or something.
It's the same thing.
It's the same thing.
I was talking to Todd and I are partners in a gym with the trainer. When I quit the radio show, the trainer I started training with at the office, Adrian, we had a space available in our building, and we opened a gym with him. And I was down there, and I was talking about the recent fundraise, email we sent out. And he's like, "How do you raise?" He's like, "How do you just raise like $1 million with an email?" And I was explaining to him. Hold on, I was going somewhere with that. What were we talking about right before that?
We were talking about Starbucks and stocks.
Oh yeah. So I was talking about risk, because he's like, "Well, what's the business with?" He's asking me all these questions. So I was like, "What's your first principal question for someone who like asked you to invest in something?" And he's like, "Well," and he started kind of going off a tangent. I said, "Isn't your real question like, when am I going to get my money and how is it protected?" And he was like, "Yes, absolutely."
Yeah.
So I was explaining to him that if you put, let's say, $50,000 in some kind of somebody's business.
Yeah.
And you did 20 of those, right? Say you had $500,000 and you did 20 of those. According to Ray Dalio, in Principles, if those businesses are if 15 of them were unrelated, meaning that the market didn't affect both of them the same way.
Yeah, they were different industries or something.
Yeah, your risk is basically zero.
Yeah.
So if you invest in 20, your risk is I don't say guaranteed a return, because nothing's guaranteed, but you have a very good chance of getting a good solid return.
Right.
And the other ones could completely fail, and one of them will 10x, and it will make up for any loss.
Yeah, that's the idea of a hedge fund, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're hedging against each bet with by making bets on a bunch of different things at once.
Yes, which is supposed to be what a mutual fund just sort of invests in the broad market and doesn't do that really well.
Yeah.
And so that's why they're essentially they just sort of track the market. You could just invest in the S&P or an index fund in any kind and get the same return.
Yeah.
With 0.25% in fees.
Sure. It's think of it like a roulette table or something.
Yeah.
Like you have, I think, 36 numbers you can bet on.
Yeah.
But they pay a certain, I think they pay like
36 to 1,
35 or 36 to 1,
yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
So, if you put a chip on every single number, you're going to hit unless it lands on 0 or 00.
Yeah.
But, let's assume 0 and 0, 00 didn't exist. You'll always at least break even.
Yeah, that's the idea.
But the idea of a hedge fund is that hopefully it's a 3x that you get a 3 times payout if one of those things hits.
Well, because it would be like the chances are that a marble rolls in one roulette number, a golf ball rolls in another, and a bowling ball rolls in another, right? And you get a return from those three, and the other ones do nothing.
Depending on which ball landed in which slot. I don't know what do you call it.
Whatever the little thing that the ball goes in.
The thingy, yeah.
The thingy, but that's the idea. So that's what venture capital is, right? Venture capital is venturing on businesses and hoping for a win.
Yeah.
And if instead you put your money in some kind of business, right? Like whether it's a piece of real estate, a startup tech company, an actual brick and mortar business, you're going to get a real return, not a hedge fund or not a mutual fund where you just don't know where it's going to go.
Like imagine if your dad basically years ago bought into like a Subway franchise.
Yes.
And like the Subway's just been there pumping out sandwiches this whole time, and he's been quietly sitting there earning whatever amount of money it is you get.
It's pretty stupid, actually. It's the Subway costs I think around 300,000 is the lowest franchise.
Okay.
And from the Subway owners I've talked to, they're doing $1 million plus a year gross.
That's not bad.
Yeah.
But you could have also made the mistake and bought into like a Radio Shack franchise. I
don't know. If I look at the board, it looks like they had to find a Radio Shack to assemble it together.
Yeah, exactly. I think radio stations are about the only people now that actually need this kind of old weird
They were on
equipment.
Amazon like, where, like I need this specific Y for $7.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, anything he could have bought that piece of land, except
But 20 years ago.
20 years ago in Moreno Valley or somewhere
Yeah.
that got built up, but it was
Yeah.
at that time very cheap to buy.
He got that advice though.
I'm sure he
My
did.
great uncle, right, who built trailer parks from the ground up, right, who had all this, who had tons of real estate, told him, he said, you have to do one thing: take your extra money, go buy land 3 to 5 miles outside the perimeter of town, and do nothing.
Yeah.
That was his advice, and he made a fortune just doing that. And it's a dumb investment.
Yeah.
But eventually, the city expanded and caught up with it.
It does, yeah. Because what they start putting like these distribution centers out there, and eventually that distribution center says we need a big 1 million square feet of space to build this thing, and we need to buy from all the landowners that are out there. And now all of a sudden, your piece of dirt that you bought for $2,000 back in 1985 is now worth $60,000.
Those 40-acre parcels, for those of you who are familiar with the area in Moreno Valley off of Merino Beach and the 60 where Todd and I grew up out there, those 40-acre parcels that are zoned commercial now, each one of those was $100,000
When they purchased them?
when my parents moved to that neighborhood in 94.
Huh.
They're, I think, $2 million now.
Yeah.
I mean, that like, if they just took money and were like, here, and just bought a piece of dirt,
Sure.
they could have sat on it, and it would be like a multi-million-dollar retirement.
But you could still buy it, and somebody could build a a commercial building on those.
Yeah,
on
they
those
want
pieces of land.
4-story office, I think.
Is that what it is?
Yeah,
4 is the max.
No, I mean that's what I've seen the perspective plans. People were developers that have come in to try to do something. The idea is they want to put these offices at that end of town because they claim the income of that end of town is higher.
Okay.
And so people who are commuting to LA or Orange County for work would likely be able to move a major business into that location and have enough talent pool to hire at that location.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's probably possible in the future.
Probably. I mean, there's that in a town, yes, but a lot of people are aging and now they're not at working age.
Yeah, and nobody's selling their homes and downsizing like people used to do.
Apparently, but there's one. That reminds me. There's a home coming up for sale in that neighborhood. I forgot.
Oh, really?
My parents just told me that they're cleaning it out because somebody passed, and I forgot to go buy it.
Okay.
It's the one next to. Actually, I'm probably not going to go buy. If anybody wants a deal, it's the house next to the. If you know the neighborhood where. Off Calmia and Marina Beach, it's the house next to the voter registration house.
Oh, okay.
Where everybody votes.
Yeah.
So if you know the area, you know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to give you an address, but if you know the area, you know the people.
Yeah, there's some people that might need to be selling out there.
Yeah.
Cleaning it out. They might have already sold it, though, too. That might be why they're cleaning it out.
No, that was this Saturday, and the family was working on it.
Okay.
It's an estate thing.
Huh.
The family's like cleaning stuff out of the garage and whatever. I don't know if the person passed or if they're, if disabled in some way, but the home is not in great condition.
Okay. Well, hey, it might be a good deal
Yeah,
for somebody
good
out there.
deal.
Somebody out there that wants to keep doing flips.
I should tell Eddie and Jennifer about it, but I think they have friends of mine that live in that neighborhood with family.
Yeah.
I'm like, hey, you could buy this one.
Yeah. Not a bad idea. It's kind of nice to work on a house like in your neighborhood because it's right there.
Yeah, that dude's addicted to like working on stuff.
Yeah. Back to some deal stuff or fear. Really, I mean, we're talking about fear.
Yeah, I mean,
I
everybody's
think.
afraid of making the wrong decision,
Yeah.
which we do constantly.
Yeah, and you have to be, you have to just have some guts to make a decision to do something. What we do is calculated, right? Like we're looking at a deal.
Yeah.
We know how it's going to turn out before we even pull the trigger on it.
Even when they go bad, we knew how it was going to go bad.
Yeah,
we
like-
talked about it before we bought it.
Sure, I talked to one of our investors yesterday. They wanted to know what's going to happen. What's the backup plan?
Yeah.
If the house doesn't sell for the price we're expecting, I said, well, we got two options: either rent it or sell it for less.
Yeah.
It's up to you, really. I mean, you're the investor, so if you're cool with us just selling it, getting out of it, and you take a smaller, smaller profit, or you make a slight or small loss on the deal. I mean, that's up to you. It's your money, so you tell me what you want.
Yeah, because we put these people in. So in all our properties, we only borrow a first loan.
Yeah.
And on that first loan, we give people an idea of what the rent will be, right? If the market turns and you got to rent it. But if the market turns and you want to sell, there's already a big gap in it, right? You're going to likely make less interest, and that possibility of, maybe taking a loss of a couple $1,000s, that's a liquidation issue. That's, you want your cash.
Yeah.
But you could always hang on to it and rent the thing and make a decent yield, and treat it like a retirement account.
Yeah.
Most of the properties we're setting out have at least a 5% yield.
Right. Yeah. Which
It's a rental.
is probably doing better than any of those pies you're looking at on the.
Pretty sure.
Yeah.
We just saw somebody's like plan for clients in our office the other day. That's their job.
Yeah.
And I cringed when I saw that they were looking at like a net 1.8% after fees.
Yeah,
or
I was
something
going to say,
like that.
I think it was like 2%, but yeah, I think I was rounding up to be generous, but
It was bad.
it is bad because it's not even keeping up with inflation.
It was her choice though. She was afraid of losing the money.
Yeah, and she said, I want something absolutely safe where I'm not going to lose the money.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of fear right there I just don't get. Because like the people that are investing in our deals, they're getting a nice little return, on these things, and they're taking a risk, but it's a pretty calculated risk.
Yeah.
And they're like realistically, they're probably getting more interest than they should. Like they're probably
They
getting
definitely are.
higher returns than what the
Look,
industry
my
standard is.
family, not my direct parents, but other family members of mine, are really happy with their results.
Yeah, exactly.
And his response was, "Wait, so if it all goes sideways, I get a rental property?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Great. Where do I sign up?"
Yeah, pretty much.
And that's the non-riskiest. That's why real estate has such a lower risk if you don't have to sell.
Yeah.
It's all cash, unleveraged.
And worst case scenario, let's assume he borrowed money against his personal residence to
Sure.
get into these investments, which I know he didn't. But
Yeah.
if he did, if everything goes belly up and he has to sell the other house, he's still got this other home that he can move into, and it's a house, it's a home. Like that's
Paid free and clear.
It's paid free and clear. Like it would be that'd be an easy move. So
Yeah.
it's it's a nice little I don't know. It's safer to me than
It's a
doing
safety
it.
net.
It's a big safety net.
I mean, what you got $400 a month in utilities, and you could collect Social Security.
Yeah,
Golden.
and it works.
Maybe the church come by and feed you. Or you could go out and do something again.
You could, yeah, you could do that too. All right, so we're running a little short on time, but before we get going, we should talk a little bit about the Inland Empire Real Estate Investment Club.
Oh, we should.
I know we mentioned it earlier, in passing, talking about, going to those big mentor program boot camps and stuff, but the Inland Empire Real Estate Investment Club is a no-sales real estate investment club that we host one big monthly meeting every single month at the Mission Inn in Riverside. We get together as a big group of investors, a lot of people of different education and knowledge and experience levels.
It's like a support group.
It's like a support group where we convince you, no, you're not crazy. This is a good business to be in. And you could absolutely make money doing this if you get with the right people. So the big monthly meeting is always on the fourth Wednesday of the month. So this month that'll put us on September 26th. And before that, we always do a Saturday morning coffee event, which is on the 22nd this month of September, where we get together at an Arcade Coffee Roasters in Riverside and drink coffee and have a couple bites to eat at the place, talk about real estate.
We actually have coffee and food now. Like, it's part of the thing now, right?
We have coffee and food, yeah. So it come out. It's $10, because we do have to pay for the coffee and the food. Arcade definitely appreciates the business from us. So it's $10 to get into that. If you're a member, though, if you go on to iereic.org and sign up as a member, you can get in for as little as $19 a month. You can actually come to the coffee meetup. You can come to the main monthly meeting as well as the cash flow game for only as low as $19 a month.
Which would be $50 for all three of those.
It'd be $50 otherwise, because the main meeting's $30. We actually feed you like real food, and there's like soft drinks, coffee, all that kind of good stuff, and then
it's like a circus and everything.
It's a circus, yeah. It's a lot more fun.
We have an elephant and a giraffe.
One day,
and just
we used to have a band.
We did have a band. It was awesome.
But yeah, come on out. And to get more information on that, you can go to meetup.com, look up the Inland Empire Real Estate Investment Club. We're the group with over 4,100 members that meets in Riverside. We're the largest group out this way. And again, when I say no sales, what that means is we're not going to pitch you on some kind of a boot camp or a mentor program that is going to cost you, a fortune to get into. Instead, all we really offer is mentorship, and all that kind of stuff. So thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Stephen, for coming on, and we'll see you all again next week. Have a good one, everyone. Take care.